You look at the Chinese economy, Professor Summers, and the downturn, the broad-based downturn across a number of indicators. Does that give you any concern about its impact on the global economy and the United States in general?
I think so, and I think that the American discussion tends to be flawed in expressing all of its concern about Chinese strength rather than about the various risks, both economically and more broadly geopolitically, associated with Chinese weakness. And I'm struck at other moments when the United States became very alarmed about a rising foreign power with a commitment to technology and a track record of substantial success. People look back and think it didn't see signs of weakness and it overreacted in dangerous and provocative ways. I think that's how people would see the history of the early 1960s. Mm-hmm. And I think that's how people would see the relationship with Japan. Mm. And I think that's properly cautionary for us.
Mm. And as I've heard you say, that the relationship with Japan didn't improve because of a deal, but because the Japanese economy weakened substantially. Do you see that being the same way that the US-China relationship may be diffused?
I think it's quite different because I think that Japan was never a geopolitical threat to us. It was never a security threat to us. It never had a government that needed to draw on nationalism as a source of national unity. And so once there wasn't an economic threat, there wasn't an economic threat. I think the situation with Chinese economic weakness is much more problematic because of the ways in which it will drive nationalism in China and may drive a certain scapegoating of foreigners and generate a certain truculence in China's international relations.
We've had various reports this week that President Trump is considering rolling back tariffs in exchange for concessions from China, ranging from staging a signing ceremony on US soil to vast purchases of agricultural goods. And I'm wondering, in international terms, how does this look, this sort of flip-flopping between hard action and softening stance towards China, in your view?
We'll have to see how it all plays out. I doubt that in a long-term sense, changing the level of agricultural exports or the location of a signing ceremony is likely to have a terribly fundamental effect on either economy. I think in general, deconflictualizing is good, reduces uncertainty, and probably acts as a spur to growth. So I think the right thing to be hoping for is more in the way of agreements rather than less. But it doesn't seem to me that we're addressing in any of the discussion this week the broader undercurrents that are what's really shaping the situation.
Sure, and this is, as some people have said, this mini deal or phase one deal seems to be more of a sticking plaster than a long-term structural deal, but your advice would be to pursue it nonetheless?
I think more agreements and more sense of things being under control are better than less, but I don't think that the various fissures and tensions that exist are going to be substantially addressed by this deal.
Is there a deal that could be done? I mean, you've got two economies who are, seemingly at loggerheads, very different trajectories. Is there a deal that could be done that would make sort of economic sense?
I don't think there's anything substantial gained by the tariffs in either direction. I think there are legitimate concerns that the United States has in some areas, probably more in the technology area than in the trade area, that China ought to be willing to address. And I think if China does address those difficulties, that will help the relationship and is likely to help both economies.
Mm. When you see certain issues perhaps getting conflated, as somebody from certainly the economics world, national security issues being conflated with trade issues, is that something that would have concerned you in the past and perhaps still?
I think that's always been true. When I was Secretary of the Treasury 20 years ago, there were concerns about export controls to China and other countries, and that was part of protecting our national security. So I don't think it's ever been the case that national security issues and economic issues were divorced. I think what's important is to see them and evaluate them in clear terms and to try to work towards reasonable modus vivendi. There's certainly been times in the past when the United States has been sloppy and enabled the export of national security sensitive technologies. And there have also been times in the past when the United States has tried to restrict technologies that in fact were widely available from many sources inside and outside of the United States. And what's necessary is to strike reasonable balances. Whether the current administration is doing that, I'm not close enough to make confident judgments. I can't say that the nature of their rhetoric or their unwilling to work with third-party countries give great confidence in the skill with which they're negotiating. But I'm not in a position to evaluate specific technological issues.
Sure. Does it sadden you to see that the sort of coalition of allies is not being formed? Do you think that the strength in numbers mentality would be more effective in dealing with some of the issues that you say are valid against with China?
I don't think it's so much strength in numbers as one against many is rarely an effective position in negotiation. And I think going back to the decision to abandon the Trans-Pacific Partnership through the decision to launch trade sanctions and threats of trade sanctions with virtually every major economic power in the world, through the insistence on bilateral forums, through the inconsistency and vacillating nature of American demands, I don't think we've conducted ourselves in a way that is calculated to be maximally effective. At the same time, I think China needs to appreciate that it has somehow allowed the broad foundation of a strong relationship between the United States and China to erode within the United States, to the point where my guess would be that the Democratic presidential candidate, whoever that turns out to be, is more likely than not to criticize Donald Trump as not having been firm enough with China, as to criticize Donald Trump for having been too hawkish vis-a-vis China.
Sure, and it's no secret that you've not been a fan of Trump in your various statements and speeches and so on. Who do you think should be the next US president, and what would be your advice on trade policy towards China?
Well, I'm going to stay out of particular domestic politics. In general, I think a Democrat from the tradition of the presidents I was privileged to work with, Bill Clinton and Barack Obama, is what I think would best carry the country forward. I don't think this is a moment to divide the country between business and labor, or between the well-off and the less well-off. I think that we have challenges that we can all meet together. Economically competing with China is one, climate change is another, dealing with all the various consequences of information technology is a third, accelerating our economy by addressing a decaying infrastructure, lagging education, and lagging capacity in science. Those are all common elements that can and should bring us together. I hope that'll be the focus of the next president. With respect to China, I hope we'll choose issues that are most important for our own national security, most important in contributing to US prosperity, and we'll address them collectively with allies and consistently in the positions that we take. And I think that will enable us to be more effective than we have been.
Professor Summers, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.